Oh, you didn't know. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Value of Wrestling. And it's This Week in Wrestling History right here on YouTube. On the Big Tyme, I'm your host for this wonderful show as we deep dive into the history of professional wrestling. So get ready to jump in the time machine, sit back, relax, get you that cold drink, get you a nice thing of popcorn as we dive deep into wrestling history for this week, starting on October 20th, working our way all the way to October 26th. We're going to journey through time, through some of the most historic moments in professional wrestling history, some of those memorable moments that we'll never forget, some of those legendary moments that will always make us smile. Ladies and gentlemen, join me as we dive into wrestling history, and we're going to start on October 20th, and we're going to go all the way back to the year 1964. 1964, Mad Dog Vachon would defeat Verne Gagne to win the AWA World Heavyweight Championship in Minneapolis, Minnesota. What a legendary night in wrestling history this turned out to be. Two big-time legends, two Hall of Famers, and Mad Dog Vachon and Verne Gagne. 1996, WWE In Your House, Buried Alive. Live from Indianapolis, Indiana. The main event was a Buried Alive match between The Undertaker and Mankind. The Undertaker would win this match, but would eventually be attacked by the debuting Executioner, better known under the mask as Terry Bam Bam Gordy. They would then bury The Undertaker alive, and afterwards The Undertaker would shove his hand up through the dirt, letting the world know that dead men don't die. Where were you on this legendary night? Do you remember this event in 1996 in your house, buried alive? Do you remember what you felt when The Undertaker popped his hand up through the dirt, letting the world know that he was still here and still alive? 2000, WCW would announce that they had released Bret the Hitman Hart almost 3 years after they had signed him. Hart was out of action due to an injury he suffered in a match with Goldberg. Yes, Bret Hart had suffered post-concussion syndrome after a match with Goldberg. Shortly after that, Bret would announce his retirement for professional wrestling. 2003, Shawn Michaels and Goldberg would tangle on an episode of Monday Night Raw, only for Batista to make his return to attack Goldberg to claim the $100,000 bounty that Triple H and Ric Flair had put on the head of then WWE World Heavyweight Champion Goldberg. 2007 saw Brock Lesnar announced as the newest member of the UFC heavyweight division. Yes, UFC 77 pay-per-view. Brock Lesnar would be announced that he was joining the UFC heavyweight division. What were your thoughts when you heard this? Were you watching UFC at this time? We all know the impact Brock Lesnar left on the world of MMA and the UFC. What an amazing time to see all this go down. 2010, Nigel McGuinness would sign TNA only to debut as Desmond Wolfe. Were you ever able to catch Nigel McGuinness in TNA under the name Desmond Wolfe? Now he's with AEW as a commentator. He recently had a great match with Bryan Danielson, but Nigel McGuinness, one of the great talents, had an amazing match, had many great amazing matches in TNA. Hey, tell us what you think about Nigel McGuinness and his time in TNA as Desmond Wolfe. Finally, 2013, AJ Styles and Bubba Ray Dudley would tangle up at TNA's Bound for Glory. This was the era of Aces and Eights, where they tried to recruit AJ Styles to their group, and even TNA slightly turned about against AJ. AJ went rogue, and a rehash of somewhat many people would call a rehash of the NWO Sting angle, but it did a lot for AJ Styles here. This was right before he left TNA, went on to New Japan Pro Wrestling, but he would win the TNA title here over Bully Ray, kind of ending the Aces and Eights at this point. Of course, on this card, we also say the in-ring debut of EC3. We jump to October 21st, and we go back to the time of 1963 when these two legendary Hall of Famers would lock up in Madison Square Gardens. Yes, we're talking about Bruno Sammartino and Gorilla Monsoon. They would fight to a draw for the WWF World Heavyweight title in Madison Square Gardens. on October 21st, 1963. Moving forward to 1991, and one of the most historic and legendary moments in wrestling history, the then WWF. This was one of those most controversial moments at the time. This was a little before its time. This was even before the Attitude Era. This was the night on an episode of WWF Superstars that Jake the Snake Roberts would brutally attack Macho Man Randy Savage using his King Cobra. The Cobra would bite into Randy's arm. It was a graphic time. They did show up close pictures of this Cobra gnawing into Savage's arm. If you go listen to the stories of this event, Savage was very paranoid and made the snake watch the snake bite Jake because he wanted to make sure it was devenomized before he took this bite. Do you remember this night? Do you remember this moment in history? What did you think when you first saw this? Have you not seen it? Why don't you go back and watch it? It was a legendary moment for its time. Well before its time. Tell us what you thought. The discussion and comments are open. Let's have a conversation about any of the events we've talked about so far and any of the events we're going to talk about. 1996, Monday Night Raw, Bret Hart would come out and announce that he had turned down the offer from WCW and be signing with WWA or WWF at the time. He also would accept Stone Cold Steve Austin's challenge for a match at Survivor Series. Bret Hart would sign an unprecedented 20-year deal with WWE and Vince McMahon, only for Vince McMahon 1 year later to tell Bret he was unable to fulfill the obligations and help facilitate Bret's transition and signing with WCW. How did you feel when Bret Hart signed back with WWF? And how did you feel when you found out he was actually having to go to WCW after all of that? 2016, October 21st was a sad day when legendary wrestler and manager Frenchie Martin would pass away from bladder cancer at the age of 66. What were your thoughts on Frenchie Martin? Did you see him in action? Do you remember as a manager? Let's talk about it. 2018, NWA brought us their 70th anniversary show from Nashville, Tennessee, where Nick Aldis and Cody Rhodes would tie up one more time. This was 1 month after Cody beat Nick Aldis at All In for the 10 pounds of gold. Of course, here in a 2 out of 3 falls match, Nick Aldis would come out as the victor, regaining the NWA World Heavyweight title and 10 pounds of gold. What a legendary night, what a magical night, and what a magical match these two had. And can you believe only 6 years ago these two were fighting on an NWA show, and today they both are a part of WWE and both are on SmackDown. Finally, in 2020, All Elite Wrestling aired the Dinner Debonair skit between MJF and Chris Jericho. This was the time that Jericho was trying to recruit MJF to the Inner Circle. This would actually get nominated for a Tony Award, this segment here, where they would sing and dance and have a lot of fun. AEW was actually kind of fun. Jumping to October 22nd, it's 1995, and it's In Your House for Great White North, live from Winnipeg Arena in Manitoba, Canada. It'd be the night that Shawn Michaels would be stripped of the title after being beaten up the night before. The title would have been awarded to Dean Douglas, who would hold it for 11 minutes before losing it to Razor Ramon. Elsewhere on the card, the debuting Goldust would take on Marty Jannetty. Yes, Goldust would make his in-ring debut on this show, better known to the wrestling world prior to this and today as Dustin Rhodes. Where were you in history when Goldust made his appearance? How did you feel when came out? 2017, WWE presented the TLC pay-per-view from Minneapolis, Minnesota. The top matches were shaken up on this card after illness to the top talent. The event was scheduled to see The Shield in a handicap match against Braun Strowman, Kane, The Bar, and The Miz. But due to an illness with Roman Reigns, he was unable to compete, and Kurt Angle would replace him, making this his first in-ring appearance for WWE since his original run with the company ended in 2006. We'd also see a match, or what was scheduled was a match between the Demon Finn Balor and Sister Abigail's Bray Wyatt. Unfortunately, due to illness with Bray Wyatt, he was replaced in what was a dream match between Finn Balor and the phenomenal AJ Styles. October 23rd, we travel back to 1974 when in Nashville, Tennessee, Robert Ford would defeat Jerry the King Lawler to win the NWA Southern Heavyweight title. Nashville, a hotbed for wrestling for many years. Legendary people have came through Nashville and historic wrestling events have taken place in Nashville, Tennessee. You remember a historic event in Nashville? Drop your comment below. Let's talk about it. 1994 would see Halloween Havoc live from Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, Michigan. We would see the WCW United States Championship on the line as Hacksaw Jim Duggan defeated a then known as Stunning Steve Austin. Hacksaw would retain the title by disqualification. The main event then would see a career versus career match in a steel cage, and the WCW World Heavyweight Championship was on the line between Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. Hogan would come out the victor. Mr. T would serve as a special ring enforcer. Ric Flair was forced to retire, and of course, as we well know, that didn't last. 1995, Monday Night Raw saw Alundra Blaze defeat Bertha Faye to win the WWF Women's Championship. Of course, it would only be a few short months later that Alundra Blaze would make her debut or return to WCW as Medusa, taking the WWE or WWF Women's Championship and dropping it in a trash can in one of the most iconic Monday Night War moments in history. WWF would decommission the belt, and the belt would stay inactive until 1998. Do you remember Alundra Blaze winning this title? Do you remember her returning to WCW, showing up with the women's title and dropping it in the trash can? A very iconic moment in the WWE, WCW Monday Night War history. If you haven't, you need to go check out the network and go back and live some of those great moments. Sadly, October 23rd, 2000 turned out to be a sad day when the world found out that Rodney Anoa'i, better known to the wrestling world as the Legend and Hall of Famer Yokozuna, had passed away at the age of 34. Yokozuna, a legend in the ring, as he would win the Royal Rumble, become a two-time WWF champion and a two-time WWF Tag Team champion. It would only see two men in the first 6 months in his career in WWF knock him off his feet, one being Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the other one being Macho Man Randy Savage. Of course, Yokozuna would be inducted by his cousins, the Usos, into the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2012. Do you remember Yokozuna? Do you remember some great moments? What were some of your favorite Yokozuna matches? Drop your comments in the comments below. Let's have a discussion about it. What a legend Yokozuna was. 2004 was a great day when IWA Mid-South brought you CM Punk versus AJ Styles for their heavyweight championship match. It took place in Highland, Indiana. What a great match when these two came together face to face in IWA Mid-South. Do you remember this time era? You remember CM Punk from this era and AJ Styles? Were you there? Have you got to see this tape, this match? Let us know what you thought of it. 2008, TNA Impact is live at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, Las Vegas, Nevada, when Kurt Angle, Sting, Big Sexy Kevin Nash, Scott Steiner, and Booker T would come together to join a new faction named the Main Event Mafia. What did you think about the Main Event Mafia? How did you feel about these five men coming together to form one amazing stable? October 24th, the year is 1993. It's WCW's Halloween Havoc from New Orleans, Louisiana. The main event saw Vader take on Cactus Jack in a Texas death match. The only title that changed hands on this card was when the Nasty Boys defeated Marcus Bagwell and Too Cold Scorpio to win the WCW Tag Team titles. Do you remember Halloween Havoc 1993? What were your thoughts? If you haven't, go watch it on the WWE Network on Peacock. What an amazing time. What a great match. A Texas death match, Cactus Jack and Big Van Vader. 1998, Cleveland, Ohio, ECW, the Deadly Boys would defeat Rod Van Dam and Sabu to win their fourth tag team titles. What did you think of ECW? Was it not a fun time? The Dudley Boys, an amazing tag team through and through, and made a name to cement themselves as one of the legendary tag teams of professional wrestling. But what a night for the Dudley Boys here in 1998. 2015, It is NXT, and they are at the Aftershock Rock Festival in Sacramento, California. Bayley will retain her NXT Women's Championship against Alexa Bliss. And the main event saw Finn Balor beat Tyler Breeze to keep hold of the NXT Championship. The highlight of the show came during a Baron Corbin versus Samoa Joe when Corey Taylor from Slipknot slapped Corbin, allowing Samoa Joe to get the win. What an amazing night. What an amazing event right here up the road from me in Sacramento, California. Were you there at Aftershock? What did you think about some of this great action? NXT, what a time. A great time in NXT history. 2020 Impact Wrestling presented Bound for Glory, where Ken Shamrock would be inducted into their Hall of Fame. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson would help induct the man known as Ken Shamrock into the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame. There were three title matches that night. The North won the tag team champions. Su Yung would return as the mystery opponent, claiming Deonna Purrazzo's knockout title. And Rich Swann would better Eric Young to win the Impact World Heavyweight Champion. What a great Bound for Glory it turned out in 2020, and the induction of Ken Shamrock into the Impact Hall of Fame. October 25th, 1998, WCW held its annual Halloween Havoc pay-per-view live for the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. This is infamously known as the pay-per-view that went too long. Due to complications with runtime, the 3.5 hour instead of the usual 3 hours show saw it overrun and get cut off before the main event was ever showed, meaning that many people were not able to watch the main event. It was then replayed on Nitro the next night and recorded 7.78 million viewers, which was the most for any wrestling match on cable up until that time. WWE would lose $2 million after having to refund many people for the pay-per-view botchery. We also saw on that card Chris Jericho defeat Raven by submission to retain the WCW World TV title. Bret Hart defeated Sting to retain the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship. And in what was voted the worst match in 1998, Hulk Hogan beat the Warrior by pinfall in a WrestleMania 6 rematch. And of course, the main event saw Goldberg defeat Diamond Dallas Page to retain his WCW World Heavyweight Championship. Of course, Halloween 1998 is included in one of the worst pay-per-views in wrestling history. How do you feel about Halloween Havoc 1998? Do you remember this? Were you watching it live when it cut off? How did you feel? You remember showing the matches next night on Nitro? Did you tune in? I know I did. 2003, it would become official, not just on screen, but in real life, when Stephanie McMahon and Paul Triple H Levesque would tie the knot. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. First, it was all storyline, but eventually they fell in love and married and are still married and the strongest couple in professional wrestling, as they pretty much rule the world of WWE. How do you feel about Triple H and Stephanie McMahon having a storyline marriage so they eventually really get married? 2008 saw Blue Demon Jr. beat Adam Pearce in Mexico City to win the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. With the win, he became both the first Mexican and the first masked wrestler to win the NWA title. Do you remember this match? Do you remember this historical moment in wrestling history? A Demon Jr. becoming NWA champion. 2019. An Impact Wrestling taping in Windsor, Ontario, Canada saw Sami Zayn defeat Brian Cage in a steel cage match to win the Impact World Heavyweight Championship. Brian Cage, now a part of AEW. Sami Callihan still floating a lot on the indie scenes, but what amazing both these men be. Brian Cage, coming from north of here in Chico, California, has a lot of connections to some of the groups and places we work with. Go watch the AJ Hirsch interview we have on here where he talks about Brian Cage. Briefly. Finally, October 26, 1997, WCW held their annual Halloween Havoc pay-per-view, again at the MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas, Nevada. Rey Mysterio Jr. defeated Eddie Guerrero in a title versus mask match to win the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. Of course, if Mysterio had lost the match, he would have been forced to remove his mask. The match was named by Wrestling Observer Russ Newsletter as the fourth best match of 1997. And it was a legendary match. If you haven't gone and watched it on Peacock, you need to go watch Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio Halloween Havoc 1997 tie it up, because it was one of the amazing matches. and really stood out on its own because later on this card, what was considered the worst match in 1997, when Roddy Piper would tie up with Hulk Hogan in a steel cage match. Piper won the match after applying a sleeper hold to Hogan. Of course, afterwards, a fan jumped in the ring and was taken out by Hogan and Randy Savage, who tried to interfere earlier in the match. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. We have traveled back in time, and now we're going to travel back to 2024 as we close out this edition of This Date in Wrestling History. I hope you learned something. I hope you got a chance to go back down memory road and relive some of the great moments in wrestling history right here with me on This Week in Wrestling History. I went 1 year with This Date in Wrestling History, giving you a 60-minute shoot, or a 60-second shoot, on everything that happened on this day in wrestling history. Now I'm diving a little deeper, giving a little more details, a little more information, and giving us time to discuss what happened in a week of professional wrestling history. I'll be here next Saturday with another edition of This Week in Wrestling History, starting with October 26th and working our way to November 2nd. It should be a fun time. I hope you're enjoying this. Give this video a big thumbs up. Make sure you ring that bell for notifications. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Become part of the Value Wrestling Army. Become part of the Value Wrestling family. We are growing. We are moving. We are making moves, ladies and gentlemen. We got a lot of great things coming to you, and we got a lot of great things that you're going to watch out. We've got some amazing moves to make, and we're doing some amazing things. We're in an exciting period in the Value Wrestling history. Our name is getting out there. There are people recognizing us. All across different brands. They know we're here. We're knocking on that door, and we're creeping closer and closer to the top of the IWC mountain. We are going to be one of the best in the wrestling podcasting game. You better believe that, because we're well on our way. So join the Value Wrestling family. Be a part of the Value Wrestling Army. And I will see you on the next one right here on the Value Wrestling, right here on YouTube. And until then, adios. So long. Goodbye.